Hello, I am Katie O'Hara Krebs, and I am the social media editor for Portal Libraries and the Academy. Today, I am pleased to welcome Elspeth Olson, Assistant Professor, Outreach and Public Service Archivist at the University of Nevada, Reno, to speak about her article entitled Scaffolded Assignments and Embedded Archivists, a Critical Assessment of the Themes in Archival Instruction Literature, 2013 to 2023. This article can be found on Portal's preprint site in Volume 25, Issue 3. And this article is free to read, and viewers may access the article by navigating to the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. First of all, thank you, Elspeth. Welcome. I'm glad to see you today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. So I wondered if you could tell us and just give us a little insight into what was the inspiration and motivation behind this topic.
It seems to me that a lot of people's research starts with something they're annoyed by. And I did not enter into this career with the plan of doing instruction. I always assumed I would be, sort of back of house doing processing work. But in the last couple of years, I've transitioned into a position that does instruction, does things like outreach and public services, as my title says. And so I've had to educate myself about pedagogy, sort of on the fly as I go, learning as I do. And I was frustrated that the literature on archives instruction is so heavily aspirational, and it's also very case study based, and it doesn't seem to reflect what I'm hearing anecdotally from people in my positions, or my kinds of position about the lived reality of what archival instruction is about. There's a lot of emphasis in the literature on these, full term long assignments and working with a specific class for multiple weeks, whereas most of us are just getting the one shot. We have professors who don't know what they want to ask for. They know they want their students to visit the archives, but they don't really know what that involves because it wasn't part of their educational experience. And so I wanted to look at the literature, some of the big things that had come up, um, and see sort of what themes are being highlighted in the literature, and then what themes I'm hearing about and living myself in this kind of role that are not reflected in the literature, and to point some of this stuff out.
Was really, I really appreciate the way that you positioned that most of the faculty that you interact with probably were not, did not have this as part of their instruction or
Yeah.
so that's a really interesting perspective. I wonder if you could give us an overview or just a little bit more of a summary of the article that was published in the latest issue of Portal.
Yeah, I did a survey. I did a deep read of about 25 different publications, mostly articles, but there were a couple graduate theses in there as well that turned up that were quite interesting on the topic. Published between about 2013 and 2023. There were a couple that were older that I started deciding to read because they just get cited so much, like Yacal and Torres with the Archival Intelligence. Hope I said their names correctly. You never know from reading, right? Um, and because that clearly is so influential, I felt like I needed to refresh my memory about what that was about. But just to look at some of the big things that turn up. So like I mentioned before, there's this emphasis on the scaffolded assignments, these being embedded in the classroom. There's a lot of emphasis on the idea that with Common Core being instituted, the students that are coming in now are expected to have this experience with research. But I'm finding that that's not actually the case. So one of the things that was really important to me to point out is that the one shot still has value. It still is very much what most of us are doing most of the time. Uh, and it's better than doing nothing in a lot of ways. But I also wanted to point out that archives and academic library instruction in general, it's still a pretty young service as library services go, especially the archives instruction side of things. We've really only been standard for about a generation. And even that's still taking off in some institutions. But it's reached a point where we're moving away from the treasure show, we're moving away from the show and tell. And how can we establish ourselves in the literature, in the university ecosystem as part of the curriculum? Because effectively, what we're doing is teaching research methods. And so, how can we play more of a role in that? Because we may be young, but we're not a novelty anymore. for classes to offer. This is a pretty standard offering for academic libraries now. I also wanted to point out that we're within the larger library and educational ecosystem, and with so many of the articles bringing up Common Core, um, for background, my mom was an elementary school librarian for 17 years and worked at a public school, and Common Core is not instituted equally across the board. And so a lot of what we're seeing in terms of what we might expect students to come in knowing, some very basic library skills, things that I learned in second grade, like how to read a call number, how to read a catalog record, how to find things on the shelves, a lot of students don't necessarily know. And what we're seeing is the ripple effect of many, many years of lack of support for public school librarians and school librarians in general. Um, and so we are now dealing with parts of our lessons that we didn't necessarily know we would have to include, like the difference between a call number and a barcode number, the difference between Library of Congress and Dewey, so it's there's stuff that we're having to add in limited time that we didn't necessarily expect to have to include.
That's really, yeah, that's a really good perspective there. So, what is your big idea or takeaway that you hope Portal readers really glean from your article?
I want there to be more literature that reflects the actual experience of archives instruction. The aspirational stuff is really helpful, but it can also feel intimidating if you're just starting out, since most of us don't get pedagogical training. You get this messaging that this is what you should be doing, where your institution may not have the resources for that. You may not have the staff for embedded archivists or to offer, dozens or even hundreds of classes per semester. Um, you may also be establishing a program largely from scratch. Maybe it hasn't been offered there. Maybe the person who was there before left, and you kind of have to start things over again. So while the aspirational and case studies from big places, well-resourced places, they're really useful. I would like to see more literature coming out of folks who say, okay, yes, that's great to aim for, but here's what we're actually doing, and here's how we can make tiny increments of improvements to that. Like, here's how to run a really good one-shot, things like that. That would be useful for folks who are starting out in this kind of role and need some groundwork. I did.
I think we all did. So I think that, yeah, that's a great start, a great
Yeah.
place for people to continue thinking
Yeah.
about your work.
I know TPS has the Teaching with Primary Sources group has an online library with like lesson plans and things like that, but marketing of it is not necessarily great if you're outside of that particular network. So I only just learned about it now, and I'm in my third year of doing this job. So it's yeah, there's a lot of things that could be done. There's a lot of resources that are out there that are just hard to find.
Yeah. Maybe making it, helping, even this interview, if folks are watching it,
Yeah,
hoping making some connections with that as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
Any little bit helps, I'm sure.
definitely does. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about your article. I really enjoyed it. I just want to remind viewers again that you can read the article for free on the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. Thank you for joining us, Elspeth, and thank
Thank
you
you.
to all of you who are watching today. Keep an eye out for all of our upcoming author interviews. Have a great
Thank you very
day.
much.
Thank you.